Welcome back to Undefendable. We are going to be doing a play like a pro guide for the Duelist. The Duelist is one of the most aggressive and fast new champions in the game. Control your footwork, hit them before they get comfortable, and you will typically win. I would say he is probably the most aggressive and fastest hero, potentially, in the Dice Throne universe. Regularly threatening double-digit attacks, he can punish opponents on defense, and converts his footwork mechanic and unique cards into even more damage. A strong Duelist game can threaten to end games around turn 4, with an average game putting serious pressure on opponents by turn 5. The catch? A lot of that power comes from one enormous hit at a time, making damage prevention one of his biggest enemies. I would say he is an aggressive tempo burst damage hero. Um, and Duelist does not want to play past turn 6. You want to end the game by turn 4 and 5. Your goal is essentially get ahead, create value off of the footwork mechanic, hit hard, keep hitting, and end the game. His passive mechanic gives him a huge amount of value without needing elaborate setups or scheming. However, playing Duelist optimally requires more thought than you would initially think or initially appears, because your footwork position changes the value of your offense, your defense, your guard breaks, the cards you have, and even which role objectives you should pursue. Let's hop into the Duelist's leaflet. All right, so the biggest thing you're going to want, I'll zoom out a little bit actually, to really get comfortable with is this footwork track. So during your upkeep, right, during the Duelist's upkeep, you can move up to 2 steps forward or backwards depending on where you're at on the track. To take a step means to move the footwork token forward or backwards. And that would just simply be by moving this. So when attacking, gain the offensive bonus listed based on the final position of the footwork token. So if you're during your upkeep, you end here, and during your attack, you end here, you would be adding 1 damage to your attack. If you were here, you would be adding 3 damage to your attack. And then on defense, when you are attacked with normal damage, gain the defensive bonus. So if you're here, you would draw a card at the end of your defense ability and defensive roll. And then if you're here, you would prevent 3 damage. They would not trigger simultaneously. It would be wherever your token is as a result of that effect. That is the bonus you would receive. One that we're probably already familiar with is Guard Break. Guard Break is basically if you roll a 4 or 5 as a conclusion their offensive roll, with an attack. If you conclude your offensive roll with an attack, you may spend this token and roll 1. If you roll a 4 or a 5, the attack becomes undefendable. And then Disarm. This is one of the newer tokens, which I actually really enjoy. Negative status effect, opponent loses a card or income phase. So you have abilities and cards where you can inflict this on your opponent, and a player afflicted with this token may choose to discard 1 card during their upkeep phase. If they do not or cannot, very important, or cannot, they must skip their entire income phase instead, then remove this token. He has 3 blade dice, 2 boot dice, and 1 pierce. Let's hop into his abilities. All right, so generically his abilities are going to be Blade Flurry, 4, 5, 6 damage, and then if you do 4 of a kind, you can take a step. Your Feint attack is your only access to undefendable outside of your ultimate, which is something to think about if you do get paired up against a strong defensive hero. You gain a guard break, you may take a step and do 2 damage. And when I'm saying take a step, that's this. So like if I were here and then I rolled Feint attack, I may take a step, meaning I could move forward or backwards. One other thing to note is this reposition, which is right here, his passive. During your upkeep phase, choose forward or backwards on the footwork track, and you must take 1 or 2 in this direction. If you move backwards, however, during that upkeep phase, so if I'm like up here, I must take a step. So I would take 1 step back. I would actually gain a guard break if I ever move backwards from that reposition ability, which is really cool and really helpful, actually, in a lot of circumstances. Balustra is 2 blades, 3 boots. You may take up to 2 steps and then deal 6 damage. Really nice, consistent ability. Upgraded, even stronger. His strike is 7 damage. Typically, it's going to be 10 if you're at the top of that footwork. And then his large straight is just massive value. It's 13 damage, and you may take 1 step. Now, one thing to note again, if you roll an ability and you're up here, you can't take a step backwards to gain a guard break. That is only from the upkeep phase when you move back to gain it. I just want to be very clear there to make sure that that was known. Unguard, this is his bread and butter. Think of Gambit, where you're just continually rolling sleight of hand over and over and over again. This is that ability for the Duelist. You want to roll this the entire game if you can. However, if you're not able to, you still have consistencies with the straights and the Balstra, undefendable, and then even his basic is going to be pretty strong. Bladestorm is his mini ultimate. You're not going to want to chase 6s with the Duelist, but his mini ult is relatively good. And then his ultimate is 11 damage, 4 steps, 2 guard breaks, and a disarm. His defense is actually pretty sneaky, especially if you can upgrade it. I think his upgraded defense is the best upgrade he has in the game. But for now, if you roll 2 blades, for every 2 blades you deal 1. And then for each boot or pierce, you take a step backwards. So for example, if this were my defensive roll, hypothetically, I rolled 6-4, 6-4, or 2 boots and 2 pierces, I would actually step back 4 times for that defense, then do that ability. Right? So let's say I'm on defense here, and I'm here at the moment, and let's say this is my defensive roll. Okay, so I don't deal any damage because I only rolled 1, but I rolled 1, 2, 3 of the piercer boots, so I'd actually take 3 steps backwards, and then I would prevent that 3 damage. So ending on this or this during your defensive roll, you get that ability. Ending on this or this, you get that offensive ability at the end of your attack roll. That said, let's go over some of the Duelist's unique cards. First and foremost, we have his upgraded cards, hero upgrade cards. Number 1 upgrade you're going to want to do is the retreat upgrade. This is just so much value, especially if you can get it early in the game. The Blade Fury is also a really nice fallback ability and very strong. If you imagine being at the top of that footwork duel or that footwork token, you're going to be doing 7 damage plus another 3. And then 3 of a kind isn't that hard to achieve, which gives you a little bit more flexibility with stepping backwards and gaining guard breaks, etc. Also a very good ability if you can afford it. Balstra is a very good ability for upgrade because you get the additional 2 damage here, which is going to be massive for consistency, fallback potential, and footwork opportunities. The mini ult, this is probably the one you're going to want to sell. His mini ult upgrade is not that great. So this is one I would definitely look at selling unless you really need access to this, but you shouldn't because you have the feint attack. And then feint attack, situational. If your opponent has a really strong defense, I would look into this. But it's these are going to be situational. These ones I think are going to be ones you want to try and do if you can, specifically the defense. Hopping into his main fade cards, and I think this is what really separates a good Duelist player from a great Duelist player, is how you manage your cards. During your upkeep, you get to move forward or you get to move backwards based on your upkeep phase and that repositioning token. You need to know what you have in your hand and where you can step and where you can afford to not step in order to get to the position that's going to maximize your footwork value. So for example, if I have Courageous Advantage in my hand and I have the CP to do it, I may be able to take a step backwards in a riskier scenario to gain a guard break to then move forward and maximize my damage. So a lot of these cards are just based on the positioning of where you're at on the board. If you're in the neutral position, you gain 2 guard breaks, and then you could play this and take 2 steps forward. So there's just like a lot of ways or a lot of things you want to utilize during your upkeep. Don't just blindly move forward just because. However, you do want to try and be at the top most of the time to deal the maximum amount of damage on your offense. Disarm's a very good ability. This is situational, however. If your opponent has a ton of cards in their hand, Disarm loses a lot of value because they can just discard a card they don't really want. But if your opponent has limited cards in their hand and they're not drawing a lot, Disarm becomes very, 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 very strong. And then lastly, let's go over his roll phase ones. Quick Footwork is absolutely amazing. It's basically the Thor one where you can switch any of your dice to a 4 or 5. So it can get you the large straight you may be looking for. It can guarantee that your guard break's going to go through or that you can step backwards during a defensive roll if you really need it. Very, very good. Never sell this card. Blade Barrage is also really strong because you have the ability to take a step forward. So if you know you have this in the hand and you know you have CP, you could maybe take that step back to get the guard break in order to do this than that because you know you can step forward. Same thing with these as well, stepping backwards and stepping forwards to gain defensive opportunities or gain more damage is really strong. And definitely evaluate your hand during the upkeep phase before you step to know what you can do, because again, that's what's going to separate you from being a good duelist versus a great one. And then lastly, pick it up. Really, really good. Again, if you inflict disarm on your opponent and they have a lot of cards in their hands, this card becomes absolutely amazing because you just pick the discard up and hit them for 3 more damage, which is phenomenal for 0 CP as well. So as for the cards, that's kind of the breakdown. Most of them are going to be pretty good. However, there are some that situationally you could probably sell. Blade Storm, Feint Attack, depending on the matchups. And then there's a couple up here, depending on the matchups or where you're at. But realistically, it's just knowing what's going on with the board state at the time, where you're at on your footwork, and how you can leverage it and how much CP you need. That's what's going to make you great at the Duelist. As for a game plan for Duelist, traditionally, you're going to want to be at this position, the top position at all times on your offense to maximize that additional 3 damage. It just makes your board that much more threatening. You're trying to end the game as quickly as possible, which means you need to do as much damage as possible. If I were to prioritize where I wanted to go with the Duelist, Feint Attack is going to be really good against opponents with really strong defense. And Unguard is just generically strong. This is the one that I typically try to roll for most of the time because it's just really, really good. Sometimes that leads me into a large straight. Sometimes I fall back to Balstra or the basic attack if I just completely whiff really badly. But Unguard is going to basically be your bread and butter. One thing that the Duelist does not do well, he does not chase 6s that well, nor does he really need to, because you're going to get just as much value potentially and trying to end games from other abilities, so you don't need to chase 6s. He also doesn't really have like the dice mod potential to do it necessarily, or the CP or card draw to do it. You're trying to basically blow through all your CP and cards before turn 4 ends so you can do as much damage as possible and kill your opponent before they have a chance to get comfortable. What else is there to talk about? We already talked about Disarm. We already talked about the upgrades. Early game, again, you're not trying to build an empire. Go as fast as you can. Use space 1 as much as possible and strategically step backwards to gain guard break. You don't need to use guard break just to use it. Make sure you're using it strategically. And then late game, well, there shouldn't really be one. The later the game goes, the weaker the Duelist gets. The more your opponent can stay alive and hit you, the worse it's going to be for the Duelist. So try and close the game out before turn 5 if you can by just doing massive and massive amounts of damage. A couple of last tips. This space is king. Don't assume sitting further down the track is better for you defensively. Again, you want to try and end the game as quickly as possible, so you want to be on this space as much as you can. Think about your next movements. Again, use your cards and footwork based on where you're going to be and where you can get to during your rolls to maximize the opportunities for what you can achieve with the footwork track, because your hand is going to change that footwork decision. Guard break is great against strong defensive heroes, not just any defensive heroes, so use that to your advantage. And don't over chase stuff. Most of his abilities, if you're at the top of the track, are going to be good value. So you should be able to lock in your ability by turn 2 or roll 2 instead of chasing something for roll 3. So don't chase because you will be disappointed if your opponent has a mod and you don't. And pay attention to your opponent's hand size. If they have low hand size, really try and get that disarm on them to make them uncomfortable going into the later game. All right, as for matchups, the Duelist is going to be really strong against opponents that require engines or build-up. He can typically punish them and just kill them before they have a chance. So they may eventually become terrifying, but eventually doesn't matter if the opponent is dead by turn 4 or 5. Heroes without, multiplicative prevention. So like Black Widow or Monk or Ninja, Duelist may struggle into them because he's trying to hit for very, very big amounts of damage. So if you can half that or avoid it altogether, Duelist might be tough, especially if it's like on their defense or something that they can get up consistently. So, um, that being said, you know, he may struggle into heroes with that type of prevention, and then even more against some heroes with really strong defensive. Now, guard break is an answer to some of these defenses. It does give him an answer, but you do have to manage it correctly because these matchups really make the significance of the footwork more interesting because stepping backwards ends up becoming more valuable and the game will be a little bit slower. I would say his, again, biggest difficulty is going to be against those heroes that can just avoid damage or mitigate damage altogether. And those are the ones where I would avoid picking him in those matchups. So let's go ahead and do a couple of rolls. I'm going to get the cards back into the deck and we'll just do a couple of rolls so you can kind of see what the game plan looks like, how the footwork works. Wow, geez, say that 5 times fast. And then we'll go from there. All right, so to start this off, traditionally during the upkeep phase, you're going to move forward or back 1 or 2 spaces. I'm just going to do this right now. I'm going to move up to my king position. This is where you typically want to be when you're going into the offensive role. We're going to draw our cards, and yeah, there they are. We got some really good ones, so we're going to start off with a triple up, spending 2 CP to get that. And now you can see we kind of have some of these opportunities. Quick footwork is great. Blade barrage is great. Anticipation is great. That said, I do want to have a little bit of safety going into this roll, so I'm actually going to sell. Oof. I'm going to sell one more time just to have this tippet as an opportunity, and we're going to roll. We're looking for unguard. That is our bread and butter. As you can see, we're already mostly there. Almost there. Let's do one more. We do have a tippet if we need it. We are going to use it here. I mean, we do have to because we did whiff. We're going to move this up to the 4 and go to the unguard. And that is going to be 8 damage. And then I get to roll 4. So it's 8. And then it's 9, 10, 11 damage. Plus, I'm rolling 4 to see if I can get that disarm on my opponent. If I roll a 6 during that, they also get the disarm. They don't get the disarm. So we're going to be hitting them for 11 and then passing it over to them. And they're going to come at us. Let's go ahead and roll our defense, which is retreat. Again, we're at the top. And we rolled 2 boots and 2 swords. So we're going to hit the opponent back for 1 and then take 2 steps back. Being in the neutral position doesn't get us anything. If we had gotten 1 more boot or 1 more pierce, we would have been able to draw a card, but we're going to end that there. Now, it's coming back over to us. During our upkeep, we're going to move back up to that king position, gain a CP, and draw a card. And we do have the sachet. We do have a couple of options here. I'm actually going to sell the sachet, give my opportunity so that I have some consistency with my die here for the roll. And we're going to try and go for that unguard again. We're already pretty close here. Hopefully we don't have to use a mod. Whoo! All right, come on, game. Wow, that is not how we do it, folks. My goodness. That's pretty rough. Generally, you want to go for this. Let's use the So Wild against our will, and we're going to switch this to a 4 and go for unguard again. It's going to be 8, 9, 10, 11 damage, and we're going to roll 4 to see if we can get the disarm on them. We do not because we didn't roll a 6. They take another 11 damage, and then they pass it over. We pass it over to them. We'll do our defensive roll. And we will hit them back for 1 and then move back 2 steps. Again, 1 more boot or pierce would have been great because we could have drawn a card. But it's going to be, it is what it is. Again, so one thing to remember, Duelist is all or nothing. We're trying to get through our cards and our CP as much as possible by turn 4. That's turn 2. We've done virtually 22 potential damage. I'm just assuming we're taking this back. Maybe even 24 because we've hit 2 back here. So they pass it back over to us. We're going to move back up to that +3, and we're going to gain a CP and draw another card. We did get the try again, which hopefully makes unguard a little bit more reasonable here. However, I think I'm going to sell anticipate because I want to have some options. A, the try again, but also I want to try and maybe add some damage here to see if we can whittle this thing down and get this thing closer. Okay, best case scenario, 4, 5, 6. My goodness, this game. There we go. Oh my goodness, we got it. All right, so we're going to go for that 8, 9, 10, 11. We're going to roll 4 to see if we can get the Disarm on a 6. We do inflict the Disarm, which is great, especially if our opponent has been using cards. This is the one where during their upkeep, a player afflicted with this has to discard a card. If they can not or do not, they miss their income phase. So a little bit of control mechanic here from the Duelist, now dealing 11 damage back to the opponent. Let's say they do the Disarm, etc. Now, here's a cool thing here. I could add this, but I'm already at the very top step. So I'm going to hold on to this because it's 2 CP, and it gives me the ability for try again and quick footwork if I need to be a little bit more defensive while the opponent comes back at me here. Oh, sorry. So let's do this. I'm going to roll these for my defense. We only take 1 step back, but we hit them back for 1. I could... Well, no, so none of these really make a lot of sense. We're here. That's fine. We take, let's just say, 10 damage. They take another 1. So we should be ahead here. They're going to pass it over to me. We're going to step up. We're going to draw a card and gain a CP. The defense is really, really good. However, we're getting towards the end game here. I'm hoping to kill them here. I'm going to see what happens on this roll, try and maximize my value with Blade Barrage, and then go from there. So let's see if we can hit something spicy, preferably that Unguard again. That's what we're really going for. It's testing our might, and we do end up getting it. Right here, we're going to be doing another 11 damage, rolling to see if we can get the Disarm on our opponent, which we can again, getting that little bit of control. And then I know we're already at the top, but let's say this is for game. We're going to play this out for this. And if we roll 3 daggers, I think we kill them here. All right, 1, 2, 3. And then if our opponent can't answer that, it's GG's. Now, let's say they can't answer it, so on and so forth. We will sell this, upgrade our defense just to give us a little bit more damage and consistency when they attack into us. So now they're a little bit more scared after the Disarm, and we are going to take 2 steps back. And now we're hitting them for 2 damage instead of 1, because now with the upgrade, instead of being every 2 swords, it's every 1 sword. And that's pretty much how you're going to play the Duelist. You're trying to go really, really fast and end the game with almost no cards in hand and no CP because you're just reckless abandonment trying to kill them and whittle them down. That said, to be a good Duelist player, I would rate his difficulty pretty high. He's one of the fastest, heaviest damage characters. He's really consistent when he needs to be. He does not scale well, but he is very, very, very fun to play and incredibly straightforward. Hit that opponent until they die. The real Duelist is going to happen when you're balancing your cards in this footwork track, and that's really kind of what's going to be the difference of being a really strong opponent, Duelist, or really just okay. That said, don't be afraid to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much for watching.